Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And with me today is Marc Staut. Hi, Marc. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me back again, Jon.
Absolutely. Most of you know Marc, but Marc is a shareholder here as well. And he is our Chief Innovation and Technology Officer. So he spends a lot of time focused on helping us move our organization forward from an innovation perspective and overseeing all the technology. Not both of those categories, not just for Boomer Consulting, but for all of our clients. So Marc is well suited for our topic for this episode, and that is how IT should adapt to the new distributed workforce. So Marc, I'm just going to start you with a somewhat easy question. Why is it important for firms to kind of adapt to the new distributed workforce from an IT perspective?
Yeah, I think the first thing you have to realize is that we're not going back to the way things were, where everyone is in an office. People can just bring their computers to the IT workroom and drop it off and say, here, please fix this while I'm at lunch. I'll come back and pick it up later. That whole model is really, really struggling right now because people aren't spending as much time in the office. And all of the statistics that we are looking at, all of the things that we're hearing, it's not going back to the way it was. We're going to have people who are, some of them will never set foot in a physical office. Others will only be in 2 or 3 days out of the week. But there's going to need to be a way to you're going to have to figure out a way to help people with their technology needs, regardless of their location. So as the workforce becomes more distributed, technology and the technology support is going to have to shift as well so that we're able to continue to provide an amazing technology experience for our clients, whether they're internal or external.
Right. Nope, that makes a lot of sense. And for a lot of firms, that's going to, require them to think differently about how they're going to actually do that. So what are some solutions? What are some ideas? What are some recommendations you have for firms to be able to do this better?
Yeah, I think the problem that a lot of firms are going to struggle with is they're going to have to break their standards or the way that they've approached things in the past. So there was always this really rigid dividing line between technology teams will help support whatever technology was assigned by the firm, but they won't support anything that has to do with your home, right? And we're not talking about technology starting to make house calls here. That's not what we're talking about at all. But you can't have a good technology experience right now in today's world if you aren't also thinking about how you work when you're outside of the office, right? The quality of your internet connection, the quality of your experience really is dependent on technology that is outside of the firm's control these days. So I think that you're going to have technology teams take a step back and say, okay, how can we help? How can we cross over that line a little bit where we don't necessarily want it to become our responsibility to support all of these things? That just wouldn't work. There's way too much variety out there. There's way too many different equipment and providers that are out there that would be challenging for people to do. But from a solution standpoint, something that all tech teams should be thinking about is, can we provide best practices to people? Can we say, hey, these are some things to look at? So if you are struggling with your internet connection at home, for example, have a questionnaire that people can fill out. Hey, how many people are using the internet at the same time? If you've got 5 people on Zoom video calls, it's going to stress your technology, right? Your home technology. But there are still things that you can do. There are new types of routers that are out there, Wi-Fi 6 routers, mesh network routers that really extend the range of Wi-Fi and the throughput of Wi-Fi as well, so that you're going to get more from it. In many cases, it doesn't mean that people have to spend more on their technology at home, meaning you don't have to call your cable or Fios provider and increase your bandwidth. What you actually have to do is look at the equipment that's there. And I think that technology teams are uniquely situated to be able to give advice on ways that people can make their home internet, home technology work better for them.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And Marc, I know you also think a lot about on a daily basis, both internally, but also for our clients, about security. And when you think about the distributed workforce, and then you think about alongside that, just the increase of security needs, right?
Yep.
It's in the best interest of the firm to take more of an interest on kind of that home life for their staff. Would you agree with that? Or kind of how would you respond to that?
Yeah, there's a really fine line right now. A lot of the security experts are freaking out because we can't secure things the way that we used to be able to when people were inside the office. We could, put up a perimeter defense, use your firewalls, all that sort of thing. Well, now that it's distributed, people are jumping on where they can. They're sharing internet connections with other people. And that means that we have to start educating people a little bit better about, hey, this is the way to go about this. These are the best practices we want to be thinking of. And these are the things that are acceptable and unacceptable. And again, technology has a huge role in leading that charge, leading that change inside of a firm.
Right. Nope. That's great. So, as I've mentioned before, you are plugged into a lot of firms, helping firms in this area. Where have you seen firms, have success? So if you've been working with a firm and they are actually making a push in this area, they're really elevating their approach to IT to better support the distributed workforce. What type of kind of success are you seeing them have?
Yeah, there have been a lot of different strategies that firms have taken. A lot of firms went with a stipend when people initially started working from home. They gave people $100, $150 and said, hey, go improve your home workspace. That worked well for some people because they could kind of mix and match if they needed a better or bigger monitor, if they needed a new chair. It was just kind of up to them. And the firm said, hey, here, go ahead and do this. And that approach was a good first step, but the firms that we're seeing start to really differentiate themselves, start to really embrace the distributed workforce, are doing one of two things. One, they're either saying, you know what, we want to assign you the equipment. So here's the docking station, here's the monitors. We're going to help standardize this so that everyone is getting, a controlled, good technology experience that we're able to support in a proper manner. Or they're going back and giving out another stipend to people. And they're, instead of saying, hey, you can use this for anything, you can use this for a new desk or, whatever it is that you need, a new lamp or whatever for your office. Very specifically, what we want you to do is we want you to upgrade your internet, whether that is by putting in one of those Wi-Fi 6 mesh networks, whether that is calling your cable company and turning in the cable router that you paid off 5 years ago,
Right.
that has not had a firmware update in forever, and saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go get a better one and have it myself, and I'm going to get better throughput from this. I'm going to have a better technology experience all around. But there's a bit of an investment there. So firms are starting to do a second round of stipends to think about that, but they're being much more specific. And the way that IT is helping is they're defining those best practices and saying, look, you should have one of these three options. Here's, different price ranges. Here's different providers, whether it's a Verizon or a Comcast or whatever else it is. These are things that work for each of these different areas. And then use your stipend to improve one of these types of things. So that it's getting much more targeted, much more specific about how we can have that impact.
Nope, that's great. And think about too, just especially over the last year, how firms' employees, firm staff, they now have a new expectation for what their technology setup is for the, and that expectation is going to influence where they choose to stay, where they choose to leave. If they move to another organization, what are the expectations they have for that organization? So are you seeing that as well as part of the conversation here, Marc?
Absolutely. And there needs to be flexibility, right? Standards are good because it helps us be more efficient in the way that we support things. But there also has to be flexibility where you get away from the rigidity of saying it has to be this way. And if you are looking to really embrace the distributed workforce, there are a ton of advantages that are there for firms, whether it's recruiting new talent, recruiting in new areas. But again, they have to have a great technology experience. So going with a little bit of that flexibility and changing the way that IT has always approached things is going to be key for setting up your firm for the future.
Yeah. So speak a little bit, Marc, about what's going on outside the profession related to this topic. Sometimes we can be guilty in our profession of only looking within our profession, maybe another firm or another organization to see what they're doing. But we all know we need to be paying attention to what's happening outside the profession. And this topic is no different. What are you seeing outside, the accounting industry related to this?
Absolutely. Big companies are struggling with this. They are turning in office space and saying, you know what, we don't need people to come back after all. And they are embracing that distributed workforce. Now they're starting to think less about, the cubicles and desk space for people and much more about collaboration spaces. So if I was going to give advice to a firm on, hey, how do we start to think about this going forward? One, make sure that you've got the technology for people at home. So those are your standards. But two, what we're seeing some really forward-thinking companies do is they're reconfiguring their space to be more collaborative. So they're using bullpens, they're using video conference rooms, they're turning some of that space into areas where people can get together, because that's what's been really missing. People can work individually at home very easily, but to really collaborate, to really innovate and drive some change, that's where you miss that social interaction. And pulling teams together is still going to be the way to move forward.
Yep. Nope, that's really helpful, Marc. Thank you. So we have a listener here, some listeners here listening to this episode, and they're thinking, Marc is spot on. We need to be doing a better job of this. What's your recommendation in terms of next steps? What's kind of the one or two next steps you think someone should take?
That's an interesting question, John, because I've worked with a bunch of different firms, and it's not always been clear what the next step is, other than start having conversations. What really needs to happen is you need to get your technology people in a room with your firm leadership and talk about what you want the future to look like. Now, that may need to be a facilitated conversation. You may need somebody in there to kind of translate between the tech people and the business people, depending on what your configuration looks like. But having those conversations and starting to say, this is what we need. Now, how are we going to provide it, is absolutely the first step. It's going to be different for every firm because there is a variation in the way that they're going to approach the distributed workforce, at least for the time being. And every IT group is set up a little bit differently as well. So bringing people together and starting to collaborate on what do we want this to look like. And technology needs to say, how can we help? How can we actually be an advantage for the firm, that they can come to us and get those insights and we can help guide them. So technology needs to be a guide for the firm going forward.
That's great, Marc. Thank you. Well, that brings us to our time for the close of this episode. So Marc, thank you so much for taking time to be on this episode.
Absolutely, John. Thanks again for having me.
And for those listening, if you like this topic and you like this format, we release new episodes every Tuesday morning, and we kind of rotate through topics. So this week it's on technology. Next week it'll be on something a little different. So it's a great podcast for you to be able to kind of hear what's going on in other areas in your firm. So please subscribe. And Marc, thanks again, and we'll talk next time.